Right then. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's time for the Armist Inquisition. We're back again. Episode 405 on Sunday, the 4th of January, 2026.
Sick.
Nice. 6-7.
Yeah, 6-7. I'm Phil.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Matt.
And tonight I'm very happy to be joined by Guy Anderson on the line. How are you doing, Guy?
I'm good. How are you?
Gosh, there was a deathly pause then. I thought we had a...
Yeah.
There was a time, Guy, where every time we went live, we had to unplug the mixing desk and plug it back in again before we could hear the guest talking.
Right.
Yeah. It's technology.
There is definitely a slight delay, and I can see it when I'm looking at myself on the screen. I can see there's a slight delay.
Is it on Zoom where you can see the delay?
No, actually, not on Zoom, but when I actually look on your screen, the screen that is showing the four of us. Sorry, the three of us right now.
Right.
Yeah, that'd be YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
That's so they can cut anything that's
Yeah.
untoward.
we should have a bin switch. What do they
Yes.
call it in the mainstream? Is it
I
the
don't know.
bin
I don't know.
on the
no
radio?
idea.
I've heard that like live broadcasts normally like have a 5-10 second delay in case something happens and they can cut it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So whatever you do, Guy, don't mention vaccines or 5G.
Okay, I'll do my best not to mention vaccines and 5G.
Oh, so how are you doing anyway? Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you, although we should say that on the 1st of April, as far as I'm aware.
Ah,
Yeah, so Happy Gregorian New Year to you.
Gregorian New Year.
Yeah, well, this is a sort of key part of your sort of overarching thesis, isn't it? About how timelines have been changed and how populations have been molded to accept events as we're told in the history books and whatnot, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of my work has come off the back, actually, of someone called Anatoly Fomenko, Russian mathematician, who really was the first person to question the timeline and why it had been falsified. So I can't take credit for that. I've been studying his work for a long time and just condensed a great deal of it into my first book.
Is the first one? Oh, is that this one? The first book, the Tesla and the
Yes.
Cabbage Patch.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, and that is an accident. I never actually intended to write a book. It's just my wife said that I'm starting to lose my memory and it's getting worse, so I have to write everything down. And she said, before you forget it all, along with where you wrote it and what order it was written in, you should perhaps turn it into a journal of some sort, or perhaps a book, get it printed, and then put it on the shelf here, and perhaps your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren might find it of interest later on. And I started mentioning to people that I was going to write a book for myself. And Richard Vobes, I don't know if you know Richard Vobes, but he's quite a big podcaster here in the UK. He got me on the channel. I mentioned it to him, and people started asking me when they could get a copy, and within a year, Waterstones were selling it. So, none of that was planned.
Nice.
What was your sort of journey into this? Because you mentioned in the book that you're in the Freemasons, which would be another interesting. Were you already interested in sort of esoteric and stuff before you got involved in the Freemasons, or was that the catalyst for you going down this road?
No, joining the Freemasons was my quest to find knowledge that I couldn't find in books. Certainly not books that are available to the public. And when I started researching, there wasn't any internet. So it was libraries, and, somebody somewhere had a book that they would lend me. And my dad had joined the Freemasons when I was a kid. And he wouldn't share anything with me, but I managed to crack his briefcase open. And an oversized briefcase with his apron in it. Oh, wow. And this book that looked like a Bible, really, but it was coded. So a lot of the words, they had the first and last letter and just dots in between. So I couldn't make a lot of sense of it, but I understood that there were a lot of references to King Solomon, sacred geometry, the importance of numerology. And when I asked him questions about what happened there and did they really run the world, my mum would always laugh and say he puts his pinny on and he goes baking cakes with his friends. It's a big boys club. It's an educated man's version of joining, the Cub Scouts as a mature person, and there's not much difference. It's just friends getting together and having their own kind of private club where they all pat each other on the back because they've raised a few quid for charity. And he would always say the same thing to her: you can laugh as much as you like, they run the world. You keep laughing, you've got no idea how powerful they are. And that was it. From that moment on, I had to join because he wouldn't tell me anything. But that was for two reasons, I think. One, because there's certain things he can't, or rather couldn't then. And there, of course, is the fact that he wanted me, and he did the same with religion. He wanted me to make a decision for myself when when I thought the time was right, and not be pushed to do something without actually being old enough to really make that decision, without a biased opinion.
When my dad was in the Freemasons briefly, I think in the 70s, and he was a self-employed plumber at the time, so I think that was part of the reason why he joined. And my granddad was also a Freemason. He was a lifer and got his turn at Worshipful Master and all the rest of it. And I remember asking my dad, because do you remember us being interested years ago?
Yeah.
Maybe not 10 years ago, but around that time. And I remember asking my dad, because the same, he would never tell me anything, really. He wouldn't speak about it. But he just said, son, you won't find the answers you're looking for there.
No,
I took him at his
right.
word and sort of, completely lost interest after that. So was your experience similar?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I found out things about King Solomon that helped, and certainly with regard to Atlantis and Tartaria, understanding sacred geometry and how this information was shared and passed down was important. But I realized that after perhaps maybe about 10 years in, and bear in mind, you only meet 7 times a year, I realized that actually I wasn't going to learn enough, because I joined with the impression that 33 years down the line, I would be a 33rd degree Freemason. And I genuinely believed that. And I was surrounded by people who weren't going to tell me that wasn't the case. Because when I joined, I don't know what it's like now because I haven't been for about 7 or 8 years, but when I joined, they were struggling to get new recruits. And a lot of people were older. Many of them were retired. And they didn't really, I suppose, want to tell somebody something that had just joined, that was eager and had invited a couple of their friends to join as well, that actually you weren't going to get that high because I wasn't of benefit. I didn't have the right breeding. I wasn't bringing enough to the table. I was a tattoo artist. Now, if I had been a high-ranking police officer or connected within government, then I'm sure I would have had more use. But they had nothing from me to gain other than my attendance, really, and paying my subscription fees and bringing along, other people to join the party. Now, I watched people get promoted through the police force to incredible levels off the back of being high-ranking Freemasons. And my lodge just happened to be one that had a large number of people from the Met and Scotland Yard in it. So I suppose I was exposed to it more because I didn't join a local lodge. My lodge met at the Grand Lodge of the United Kingdom in Great Queen Street in London. Yeah. So, I was surrounded by, well, ultimately the highest ranking Freemasons in the UK. And it's where, the head of the Freemasons, the Grand Master, where he meets, and the Knights Templar meet there, and the building itself is incredible. But it became obvious that no matter how many times I attended, and I was only a year away from being the master of the lodge, that was probably about as far as I was going to get. And then I would spend the rest of my time in Freemasonry as a past master, perhaps taking on a role as the charity steward or officer, sorry, or maybe helping people learn rituals and so on. I wasn't going to end up, walking the same corridors as the people that really run the show. So I lost interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought this is not what I thought it was about. And a lot of people just seem to go there to network. I wanted information, why are we here? Who built the pyramids,
Yeah. Have you been following the news about Freemasonry and the Met?
It's yeah, well, I don't watch the news. I refuse to watch it, but I'm shared a lot of information. And I know that once again they want people to disclose whether or not they're a Freemason. But the problem is they all are anyway. Any, you'll find most of the Met are serving police officers, and the higher up in Freemasonry are, the higher ranking they'll be in the force. So it's nothing new. This has been going on forever. When I first joined, they were talking about that. And the problem is, it doesn't make any difference whether they declare it or not.
No, I suppose
what difference does it make?
From a practical sense, but I think it's interesting that the Freemasons are taking legal action against the Met to try and stop them being forced. But it's just one of those interesting things to watch and see what happens, I think, maybe.
I think it's all theatre myself. Look, one of the people that was very high up in my lodge was the Prime Minister's advisor for the Met Police. So, it's embedded. And this lawsuit, it's just theatre. Yeah. It's probably designed to put the public's mind at ease that have this fear that the Freemasons are running the police force. And that fear, is certainly justified.
Well founded.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, getting back to more sort of ancient things, we mentioned the timeline and the timeline change. Can you just run people who haven't read your book or maybe aren't watching you yet on YouTube? The link's in the show notes, by the way, the guy's channel. Could you just sort of run people through like the sort of grand timeline, how you see it, and what's been altered and doctored and whatnot? Yeah,
so this is all Anatoly Fomenko, really, that first put this out there. There were actually 3 Russian scientists that started looking at the timeline. And what they recognized was a series of phantom events. And it appears that the technology that we had during the time of Tartaria, which is really an echo of Atlantis, the technology was far more advanced than what we have today. I mean, I don't doubt that they couldn't do this, what we're doing right now. And they probably couldn't do their banking or watch a film on their smartphone. But they were working with a different kind of technology, one that isn't ultimately harming us. And that has to be mastering how to harness energy from the ether. But because Russia really was the stronghold of Tartaria, the West wanted everybody to perceive Russia as being slightly backward, that they weren't as advanced. And so the Jesuit Church, or the Jesuit order through the Vatican Church, infiltrated various organizations and groups within Russia and what was Tartaria to buy knowledge, to steal knowledge, and to, at any cost, make sure that this knowledge was no longer out there and keep it for themselves. So they wanted people to see a slow progression with regard to technology that ultimately led to the Industrial Revolution and brings us to where we are now. So we start off obviously inventing fire or discovering fire, and then we invent the wheel and so on, and then the Phoenicians come along and we have money and trade and agriculture, and we start to understand mathematics and so on. And then, we have the Industrial Revolution, and through, I suppose, fossil fuels, ultimately, we end up where we are today. And if you look at it on paper, you can see this very slow evolution and progression. But of course, we've got this big period, the Dark Ages, where huge chunks of time occur, but nothing happens. And that's because they were clumped in. So by adding 800 years to our timeline, we have what looks like, and most people will accept, the slow progression of technological evolution, if you like. What they don't want you to know is that 300 years ago, people were harnessing energy from the ether, using the equivalent of a rife machine to heal people, that there were gardens you could take your pets to that would heal your pets if they had an ailment, that pipe organs were being used in churches to balance your internal organs, and that energy was provided free across the world, and that things like electric vehicles were, today where they're considered relatively new, were actually commonplace. And they even electrified the roads. They put grids under the roads, which would then power trams, electric trams and vehicles and so on. So this is kind of Atlantean technology. They didn't want that being public knowledge because there was money to be made and control to be gained by supplying us with electricity at a price. So controlling the supply and making us pay for something that was previously free. So it's actually more to do with that. It's more to do with the suppression of technology to benefit the few financially. But of course, the people that ultimately are in control of how we fire a power station or how we fuel a vehicle are controlling our lives to an extent as well. So it's actually really to do with that. And because it was all happening in Russia, there was then a huge campaign to make them appear backward. And that was still going on with the Cold War and with the race for the moon. That was still happening then. But it was actually through the Jesuit order that this campaign of falsifying our history took place. And it was funded by the Rothschilds. The Vatican was financially ruined. They came along with a huge amount of money and one request, that they removed everything. They removed all traces of Tartaria. And this is supported by a document that's now declassified, that the CIA released, that actually states in no uncertain terms that we are to falsify and rewrite the history of Tartaria. It's a large document, but that's one of the best phrases in it, I think, that I've seen. So yeah, it's to do with control, and they don't want us.
Sorry, guys, is that in the public domain? Can people find that document?
Yeah, and what I can do is send you a link to it, so you can put it in the description if you want.
Absolutely, yeah.
And people can read that. Yeah, so it was an effort that was put in place ultimately by the Rothschilds, but it was worldwide, because although Tartaria was a region, it was an expanse of land, really Eastern Europe, Russia, and Asia. The ethos traveled worldwide, so people were using the same blueprints everywhere, and up until relatively recently, they've been destroying any remnants of the old world. So that was the reason for the bombing of Dresden. That was the reason for the Napoleonic Wars, and that was the reason for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were the last two Japanese islands still running energy from the ether. So everything has been specifically targeted, dressed as a war with a strategical plan behind it, but actually the overriding reach was to completely remove all traces of Tartarian technology still being utilized, I suppose.
So you just mentioned the bombing of Dresden, and I was flicking through the book just before we started, and I saw a picture of Dresden, I think, or the cathedral or something. So what was it that they were wanting to destroy there? I know you mentioned about technology, but was there something specific?
Nothing specific. It was that whole city was still running with free energy, and as was Germany. So they put together a story, and two friends, cousins, got together and decided to flatten certain parts of Europe, and then brought Russia into it. Japan was dragged into it. America was dragged into it, so they could continue this across Europe with help. And the two friends were of course the man with the moustache and the man with the cigar. They're actually cousins and worked together to destroy as much of Europe as possible.
Charlie Chaplin and Groucho Marx.
That's the one. Yeah. Of course, a lot of people think Charlie Chaplin or in some cases Walt Disney played the character. But I don't know if we can say what names we can and can't say on here, but people will know what I'm talking about. So yeah, well, that particular the Second World War was just targeting certain cities that still had architecture there and things they couldn't explain. But a big example would be, perhaps the biggest of them all, would be the Napoleonic Wars that went into Russia in 1812, where people were seeing stone buildings melt, church bells melt, 4,000 degrees of heat, and fires that seemed to defy logic, where the wind was blowing in one direction, but the fire is spreading towards the wind. And one particular French officer, high-ranking, called Count de Feur, actually wrote in his memoirs that he'd never seen anything like this. It came from the sky, and he and the troops stood back and watched brick melt and stone melt. Now that's direct energy weapons. So this technology, is obviously a lot older than we've been led to believe.
One of the areas that the book focuses on a lot is the architecture, and you give particular time to sort of prisons. Funnily enough, have you ever seen Preston Prison?
No, I haven't.
Well,
I'm going to have to now, aren't I? As soon as I come off this, I'll have to Google it.
As soon as you started talking about prisons, because I remember being a tiny little child, 3 or 4 years old, and every time we drove...
being released from prison.
Being released from prison, yeah. After I'd got out of the Cabbage Patch, yeah. I was promptly arrested and thrown in prison. Every time we used to pass Preston Prison in the car, I used to call it Castle Grayskull, because I was a big He-Man fan.
Yeah. Right.
And the building, like where the prisoners are housed, it's like your typical Victorian big oblong buildings made out of red brick, Accrington red brick.
Always red brick.
But the sort of the part of the building that's front facing, or you can see from the road, is like a really wild castellated, like it's just been dropped from the medieval era, with towers with slits for firing arrows through and stuff, and it just looks so out of place.
Bizarre, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, just in the middle of the town, like it's just been plopped from 1066 or whatever. You should.
And
look
you
at
wouldn't
it online.
build something like that to house criminals. And if you look at some of the incredible buildings out there, that a good example, and it's not a million miles away from you, or certainly it wasn't a million miles away from you, would be Denbigh Asylum in North Wales, the most beautiful Greco-Roman, what we would call Tartarian building, and it's a very extravagant length to go to house people you don't want wandering around society. The waifs and strays, the people you consider insane, are housed in the most beautiful buildings with, marble and granite. But they're always red brick, and that's because red brick harnesses and stores energy, electricity. It's the same chemical process that generates rust. So you can actually store electricity and energy inside red brick.
So why do we have these ornate buildings in towns and cities all over the country that seem to almost always be public buildings and often used for, like you said, housing the insane or the reprobates? Or
because these buildings were everywhere, and they didn't have to erect anything. So what basically happened was the Lunacy Act was introduced. So In the late 1700s, early 1800s, we see a lot of civil wars take place, the Napoleonic being perhaps the biggest, and obviously the American Civil War and so on. So they got rid of a huge number of men between 1776 and 1876. Over 3 billion men died. Now that left a population of just 1.3 billion. So they got rid of, pretty much three-quarters of the population of the world through civil war. Now, clumped in that number, are people that were killed in acts of genocide and people that died through natural causes as well, and some disease, some pandemics, because 2020 is nothing new. They've been doing that for a long time. And what they were left with was a large number of women and all of the children. So they introduced the Lunacy Act. And the Lunacy Act meant that if your husband had died in battle, you were no longer seen fit to be able to raise children yourself. And if you complained about it, you were sectioned. So that most of the men have died. The women that were able to have children were incarcerated into asylums, and the children went to orphanages. So you've got all of these people you need to house. So they repurposed old buildings to put them in. So they founded these buildings. That's why they don't say built. They'll say established, or they'll say founded. And founded is found dead. They found these buildings empty and repurposed them. And that's why if you go into an old building that's an asylum, a prison, or an orphanage, and there are plenty of them still here in the UK, that they look so grandiose, that you've got huge marble pillars and ballrooms inside them. These incredible towers and copper domed roofs, what they call onion domed roofs. That's why they're so extravagant, because they were already there. Most of the population had been wiped out, and you're left with a very small number of people, relatively speaking, that are now going to go around using the Freemasons actually to repurpose and take control of buildings everywhere. A big example would be the statue of Apollo in New York, which many people would know as the Statue of Liberty. The cornerstone was put in by the Grand Master of the New York Lodge, and then the chains were added to the statue for it to now depict Satan breaking free of its chains at the start of Satan's little season, where before that it was actually harnessing power, and it was Apollo, and it was paying homage to the the heavens, where the energy was coming from, which is the ether. So they hijacked everything, bastardized religion, and yeah, people were put into buildings that were previously not actually used for keeping people detained, but actually used for libraries, schools, and some were workshops and so on, and some were places of meditation and learning, and that's why they're so extravagant, because they weren't actually originally intended for that purpose. And it's all to do with energy. The reason that these people are sort of locked away in these buildings now is because red brick is able to store energy, so it's symbolic. You're charged and placed in a cell if you commit a crime, so you're considered as energy, and that's where this loosh farm theory comes from. We're just seen as walking batteries, and they want to drain our energy from us, and they'll do it through fear, pain, illness, financial hardship, whatever they can do to keep our energy low. And you got to hand it to them. They're bloody good at it.
I think the question on everyone's lips, Guy, is how can I convert my car to run on ether?
The irony with electric vehicles now, of course, is that every now and again you'll see a little picture somewhere of or a meme or a bit of footage on TikTok where someone's plugged their Tesla in to to charge it, and behind the charger is a diesel generator. You've got to laugh, but yeah, they Rockefeller removed all of the charging stations. Indirectly, he made it impossible in the early 1900s for them to continue. But yeah, they were charging from the street. So you could literally charge them through the road, and you could charge them through charging points if you were going, you know, off road somewhere, if you like, or out into the sticks. You could charge them, and even the New York Police Department were running electric vehicles, you know, over 100 years ago. But yeah, I mean, maybe one day you'll be able to do that. Maybe we'll go back to that. But all I know is everybody that's tried to do that has met a pretty grim end.
Yeah, if you're going to invent a car that runs on water, avoid hot tubs and light aviation.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, or they're poisoned, or they have a heart attack, or yeah, an aneurysm is a good one. But yeah, people have tried to reintroduce it, and you know, it ends badly.
Well, J.D. Rockefeller, he was behind Standard Oil, wasn't he? Big oil guy.
Yeah.
So that's obviously his motivation for getting rid of electric vehicles.
Yeah, and he teamed up with Henry Ford. Yeah, so there was a lot of money to be made, and of course, petroleum is also involved massively within pharmaceutical production. The plastic casing for for a lot of medicine is derived from oil. So you know, he wanted to be able to make money not just from fuel, but also from keeping us ill, because you know, a nation of sick people is far more profitable than a nation of well people, and if we're kept ill, then we're a little bit subdued. We're easier to control if we're not feeling right, you know, if we're not quite right. And of course, that, you know, that's perhaps been exaggerated now. They're doing it, you know, on steroids.
Which companies were making electric cars back like 100 years ago, and are any of them still going?
Oh, I don't think any of them are still going, but I've put some in my book, but I can't remember the names off the top of my head, with one exception, and that's Phaeton, which I think may well have links to Volkswagen.
Yeah, there is a Volkswagen Phaeton.
Yeah,
car.
yeah. So basically a cheap Bentley, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's the same.
I think Maybach wasn't Maybach one as well.
That rings a bell.
It's the German.
Yeah, that's like a
yes, you're right. Actually,
Mercedes, yeah, Maybach,
I
and
think you're right.
Daimler maybe as well. There was you did mention a few companies. I was just couldn't remember them off the top of my head.
Yeah, but the only one that springs to mind is Phaeton. But I'm sure you're right.
Where did you hear about the grids under the roads?
The electric, yeah. Well, a friend of mine, Campbell Purvis, he runs a channel called Autodidactic. He's been putting content out about Tartaria for years now. He and I call it Electric Avenue. I don't know if you remember a song by Eddie Grant.
Yeah, Eddie Grant.
Yeah. They've found them everywhere. Russia, Rome, all over. I think even here in the UK, they've found them. And the narrative is that if people want to Google this, if they just type in metal grids under road or something like that, I mean, you know, there's an image in my book of them, but if they want to type that in, they should be able to find them relatively easy. And they're basically hexagonal metal. What's the word I'm looking for?
Like a matrix.
Difficult.
A grid.
They kind of look a little bit, yeah, but they're individual plates.
Right.
And so they're kind of designed like a hexagon, but it's hollow. So if you imagine if you took a circle, a ring of metal, and then had it hammered into a hexagonal shape, they're like that. And the narrative is that they were used by the Romans to strengthen roads. But they're not connected. They're not joined to each other. Each one's only the size of your hand, and they're not connected. So if you drove over them, they would all obviously move anyway. There is no structure there. They would sink without. They're not supporting each other. They're totally disconnected, and they contain a high level of copper, which we know is, you know, important with electricity conduction. But the other interesting thing is that they contain an unknown mineral. Yeah, nobody knows what it is.
I bet it's orichalcum. I bet it's orichalcum from Atlantis.
Yeah.
But what they're doing, what they did was they basically just covered them. They covered the roads. Now a lot had already been covered with mud floods and so on. But newer ones had been tarmacked over. So underneath a lot of old roads, these grids are there. But they're so far down now because they're resurfaced so many times. They're so far down that they'd be hard to get to. But yeah, people do when they're doing excavation work or if there's a huge repair somewhere, then people are actually digging them up. And some roads have worn so thin in areas where potholes have become bigger and bigger that they're fully exposed now. And they worked in the same way as a bumper car, but instead of it being on the roof, it's on the ground. So they were actually charging through the roads while they were driving.
Scalextrics.
Yeah, scale electrics.
That's a better analogy than bumper cars. That's exactly it. Yeah, scale electrics. Yeah.
Hope they stayed on the track better than my old
Yes.
Scalextrics.
Yeah.
In the 80s.
Yeah. There was something about that, wasn't that? That first bend,
Oh,
you
yeah.
just went into too fast. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and having to take it off and pry the little copper
Yeah.
thing out because
And
they'd
sometimes
get
they'd
worn out.
stick in your fingers. You'd stab yourself
yeah,
with one of the, yeah.
Yeah, they would come with some sort of health and safety instructional DVD now if you bought Scalextrics.
Yes.
Yeah, I bet they would as well. Yeah.
Going back to repopulation, because we only sort of briefly touched on that, but you mentioned the orphan trains is an interesting phenomenon that you mentioned in the book. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so my mother's father was one of them.
Wow.
So what they did, and this was happening mainly in Russia, they took the orphans from Russia. The dads have been killed. They've died in battle. The ones that resisted, that survived and weren't going to play ball with New World Order and how things were now going to be. They were obviously locked away in prisons. Mum's in an asylum. So you ended up with in Russia with about 500,000 children that were orphaned, and so they shipped a lot of them to America. And so my grandfather went from Ukraine to New York on a ship, and then when they arrived, they're then taken through the orphan train movement, which was headed up by someone called Charles Loring Brace. Now he was very wealthy. He was a high-ranking member of the Freemasons and the Odd Fellows, and a very, very well-known racist. He despised anybody that wasn't white and wasn't preaching from the Bible. He absolutely publicly despised them. And his PR came from P.T. Barnum. The person that was promoting it all was P.T. Barnum, the greatest showman in the world. And if you have a look at the house he was given by what I call the parasites for his work, it was the former Iranian palace in America. It's an incredible building. So these people were well rewarded. So anyway, they get to New York and they're then told that they've got homes in the Midwest. Families are going to take them and they're going to be adopted and live happily ever after. They would always arrive on these trains outside a Masonic lodge. They would then have to perform for the crowd who were expecting them. And they'd have to sing, dance, do whatever they could to attract, if you like, an interested party in taking them. No paperwork changed hands. They weren't adopted. They were given new names and they were forced to speak English, but without an accent. They were beaten until the accent went. And they did this with indigenous children too that were stolen. They were beaten until there was no trace of an accent left. And they were put to work mainly in farms, but a lot of them would form what became the Industrial Revolution workforce. And that's why if you look at photographs of the Industrial Revolution, you'll only see children. There aren't any adults anywhere. And that isn't because they were working in a different factory or a different night, they were on the night shift. There just weren't any adults about really of any significance. And that's where miners comes from. A lot of the children were sent to mine. And so they were the miners. And that's why we refer to them as miners. And they were treated very badly, but in some cases they weren't. My granddad happened to do okay. He was taken in by a family that owned a tailor's that was actually quite successful, and he ended up joining the U.S. Air Force and became a colonel in the U.S. Air Force. Got stationed here during the war, met my nan, and so on. My nan was already married and already had 2 kids, but that's another story. And so 500,000 kids were basically taken from Russia and Eastern Europe and shipped to America. And what we did here in the UK is we took the orphans, shipped some to America, but a lot went to Australia. And we carried on doing that and until really the 40s or 50s, we were still shipping orphans across there. But this is where the Cabbage Patch bit gets involved. There weren't enough orphans to repopulate an infrastructure, and they needed more. So they weren't all orphans.
Some of them were grown.
They certainly were. Yeah.
When is this happening, Guy?
This is happening in the late 1800s. In the late 1800s, they did. We don't know how many times they've done this in the past. You know, the first reference to being cloned is in Sumerian text 4,000 years ago, but that's talking about the creation of the Homo sapien. This is the Anunnaki that we're talking about here. That's the first time that's referenced, that a supreme being, genetically modified, Neanderthal man and created us. That's the first time we hear of that being done. And obviously it's then repeated in the Torah and then ultimately much later on in the Old Testament. But it's all based upon Sumerian text. That cloning took place, and that's 250,000 years ago. So this technology is obviously handed down, and there are people that have access to this technology. I mean, today Clonaid are doing it as a service. You can go on their website now and get yourself cloned if you've got the money.
Really?
Yeah, jump on their website, clonaid.com.
Clonaid.
Clonaid.com. Yeah, they'll clone your dog. That's $50,000. President of Argentina's had 4 cloned. That's out there in the public domain. And ironically, the first child that Clonaid produced, they named Eve. Oh. And it was for a gay couple in Florida that these 2 girls couldn't obviously conceive naturally. So they took elements of both their DNA, and one of them gave birth to the first clone. So Dolly the sheep is nothing new.
What's the cheapest thing I can clone, Guy?
I don't know, but there are companies out in South Korea that clone frogs and rats, but that's just for medical research. But I don't know what the costs are. But that the president of Argentina, who is a bizarre character, he paid $50,000 and had 4. Oh, 4 English Mastiffs cloned. His dog Conan died, and he took it to Clonaid and had 4 made.
That's crazy. Wow. Well, yeah. Listeners, the donation PayPal is in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll have to get our thinking caps on. I don't want to clone Zeus.
No,
I don't want to clone something
Zeus.
Yeah, I don't want to clone my dog.
No.
There's something. It just makes me so uneasy. This subject of cloning, and
it'd be an interesting question, though.
You just have to think that it's happening somewhere.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that it's happening.
I mean, how long is
it?
Big how long is it since Dolly the sheep was cloned?
It's 99, is it? I think.
So you're talking sort of, you're going back 25, 27 years. And the interesting thing with Dolly is that a lot of people are under this false impression that clones can't reproduce. Well, we descend from clones. Even if you're just following the Bible, the King James Bible, the story in Genesis tells of a man called Adam having his rib removed, being put to sleep, having a rib removed, and another life made. And that might be metaphoric, but it's a bloody good metaphor because it's describing cloning. So, the information is there. With Dolly the sheep, she actually was she had 2 sisters. She was one of 3. And she gave birth to several offspring. And in America, there's a barrel racer, a horse. I can't remember what his name's called, but It'll come back to me in a while. Um, it's the most successful barrel racer of all time in America, this horse. And the horse is now at stud. People are spending an absolute fortune to have him stud. And he knocks out quite a few every year. So, it is a myth that a clone can't reproduce. The only thing people do question, and Dolores Cannon questioned this, is that does a clone have a soul? Does it have a connection to God or the source or the creator? Well, my argument to that would be, well, if we were all cloned to start with, then yes. And what we're talking about isn't a massive leap from IVF treatment. So, to say that a cloned being wouldn't or person wouldn't have a soul is like saying that child that was conceived through IVF can't have one either. And that Adam and Eve couldn't have had them. If Adam was created and Eve was a clone of Adam, then are you saying that Eve didn't have a soul? This isn't really what the soul's about. And I think that whether or not you're a clone or whether you're conceived naturally, I think we still carry the same DNA. We're still carrying the building blocks of life, and we're still carrying the connection to whatever makes that life possible. So I don't believe that. But yeah, cloning's been going on a very, very long time. And the sheep, Dolly the sheep, was conceived at Rosslyn Chapel.
What?
Yeah, yeah. So, but actually, it was through Rosslyn Institute, part of Edinburgh University, but it's all connected to Rosslyn Chapel. Sorry, I worded that wrong. She was conceived through Rosslyn Chapel at Rosslyn Institute.
I was imagining some kind of ceremony.
Yeah, I kind of, yeah, sorry, I just worded that wrong. But I just think that the Knights Templars HQ here in the UK, Rosslyn Chapel, and the first publicly announced clone takes place at Rosslyn Institute, just down the road from it. Yeah. I think there has to be some sort of connection there. But the funny thing, there just has, of all the places it could have happened, it's connected to the people they believe have the technology, the cloning technology, that it is held by the Knights Templar. And she's called Dolly the sheep. She was called Dolly the sheep, sorry, because she was made from a mammary cell. And so at the time, most people, when they thought of big boobs and mammaries, Dolly Parton. So she's named after Dolly Parton. Yeah, because it's a mammary cell. Yeah.
No way. So you sort of skipped over Rosslyn Chapel there. I could like to go.
Sorry.
Does this go back to the St. Clair family? Is that where you're getting your Freemasonic connections from?
Yeah, yeah. And funnily enough, my son went there a few weeks ago. He got married at the start of December, and for the honeymoon they couldn't, because they both have quite busy jobs. They couldn't get any time off work, really, just a long weekend. And they decided they would go to Edinburgh. They wanted to go to Edinburgh Castle. And he said, well, while we're here, we've got to go to Rosslyn Chapel. But they wouldn't allow him to take any video footage or photographs inside at all. No one's allowed to. And he said, I've never seen so much occult symbology in my life anywhere. And he's also a Freemason, my youngest son, and he's been studying this stuff for years. And he said he'd just never seen anything like it ever. That there are symbols that you can actually change to notes and play, and by playing these certain tunes in the correct order will actually move things. You can actually lift, incredibly heavy blocks and move things into place. Yeah, it's all to do with frequency. Wow. Frequency, vibration, ultimately, how they built the pyramids, just using frequency and sound.
Well, that leads very nicely. We've got about 10 minutes nearly left, but that leads very nicely to my favourite Tesla quote, is it? If you want to understand the universe, think in terms of frequency and vibration, something along those lines.
Yeah, frequency, vibration, light, yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned those two words, so tell us where Tesla comes into all this.
He's a strange character because a lot of people believe he didn't exist at all, and that the images we see of him, and we only see a few, are of Frank Zappa.
I can see it, actually.
Yeah, and now I've said it. It's a little bit like if you look at David Beckham now and then look at a photo of Burt Reynolds when he was younger. Because David Beckham isn't David Beckham. You know, if you look at him, he's not David Beckham. And that's why he's now on the World Economic Forum platform. You know, so they
He's a
replace
clone.
people. Yeah, he's
like
been
Paul
cloned.
McCartney.
Billy Shears.
Billy Shears.
Yeah. Yeah, so they replace people, and so a lot of people believe that actually the story of Nikola Tesla was created, hence the surname, which is an anagram of steal, as in theft, Steal. There's no video footage of him, but there is of Einstein and Edison. And this was the man who pioneered technology, really, at the time. Yet he's the only one of the three that you won't find any video footage of. There's no descendants either. And that's normally a clue, a bit like Napoleon. It's normally a clue that these were fictional characters. But if he did exist, and I hope he did, I really do, because he appears to have been reverse engineering Tartarian technology, because he got Morgan to back him, JP Morgan to back him with building what Morgan believed to be a radio transmission mast, which would transmit news across the world. With Morgan backing it, it meant that Morgan could control the news, what people heard. But what he didn't realize was that Tesla was actually building a tower that would send free energy across the world using the ether. And when he realized that was what he was doing, and Marconi beat Tesla to the post and came out with the first radio transmission, JP Morgan pulled funding, and then Wardenclyffe Tower collapsed, was destroyed. Now, Tesla believed that all of his visions came to him in blackouts, and that he was being communicated to by the Venetians. So that's what he claimed was happening, and that everything he ever did, he never needed to experiment, because he could make a working model from scratch and it would work first time as he predicted, without any failure, exactly as the vision had presented itself. And that his mother was also having the same visions, and she invented small household appliances, time-saving appliances, mainly in the kitchen, and that it was something that had been passed down to him. But the weird thing is, he never wrote anything down. Every experiment worked first time. He didn't have to write notes or diagrams. Everything worked exactly as he'd received this vision. Well, if that's the case, why do they say it took 2 trucks to carry all of the information from his hotel room that then went to a secure location in New York? But also, how do you get 2 truckloads of information in one safe in a hotel room? So it all starts to, the more you pick away at it, the more it falls apart. And then, of course, there are other things that are a little bit strange. And that would be that, one of them for me is that at school I wasn't taught about him. I was taught about Thomas Edison. Yet, if everything's true about Nikola Tesla, the only reason we had lighting and electricity in the school that worked the way it did is because of Nikola Tesla and not Thomas Edison. Because direct current would never operate lighting and computers and and so on, like we have now. So why weren't we told about him? And the average person in the street, if you stop them and said, "Who's Thomas Edison?" they'll tell you the man who invented electricity. If you say who, and if you just said, "Who's Tesla?" or "What's Tesla?" Have you ever heard of Tesla? They'll say, "Yeah, a friend of mine's got one." Why is that? So I sit on the fence. I want him to have existed, but the further I've dug, the harder it is to accept. And when I contacted his museum in Serbia, I said to them, "There's no video footage of him anywhere in the world. Why would that be? Especially given who he was." "We don't know, but we think he might have been shy." I said, "Well, that's funny, because on your website it says that he was paid to talk publicly. People wanted him at dinner parties. He was the must-have guest. He was constantly interviewed by everybody. Why was he able to do that if he was camera shy?" "Oh, we don't know." And then someone approached me and said that they were his nephew. Sorry, I beg your pardon, they were his niece. and that they could prove that he was real and he existed. And I thanked them, obviously. I was saying, I'm so pleased to hear from you, and anything you can share with me would be a great help. Have you got any photographs? No. I said, have you got anything at all? No. I said, well, what have you got to prove? Well, I'm just telling you he was my uncle. And I said, okay, I'm going to need a little bit more than that. Is there anywhere I can go? Perhaps you could send me your family tree or something. And they replied saying, Donald Trump said I'm not allowed to talk to you anymore. So I just replied saying, I don't know what medication you're on, but I'd prefer it if you didn't contact me again. And I didn't hear from them after that. So I'm guessing perhaps their carer turned their internet off, or or something happened. But that's the closest I thought I'd ever got. But yeah, a lot of people think that the photos we see are Frank Zappa. And if you look at Frank Zappa, some people say that actually that is Nikola Tesla. That Nikola Tesla, using time travel, went back to the past, brought his younger self back to the future, and that was Frank Zappa as a child, and that is why Frank Zappa's work was all about frequency and not actually about music. If you look at his work or listen to his work, it's all to do with actually frequency and not actually to do with putting out a decent song. He was a mathematician or a scientist using music. So who knows? But there are a lot of theories. But the one thing that the narrative tells us is that the 3 files never handed in by John G. Trump, Donald's uncle, who was at the MIT, were to do with time travel. And shortly after that rumor appeared, 3 books came out by someone called, well, they're allegedly a lot older than that, but 3 books became quite popular, written by someone called Ingersoll Lockwood, who wrote about Baron Trump and wrote about the last president, a hotshot American businessman in New York who, out of nowhere and beyond, beyond everybody's wildest dreams, became the last president of America. And if you look at what Trump's doing, he's turning the White House into a permanent residence. The next president after Trump will be another Trump.
Is that ringing a bell, lads? Ingersoll Lockwood.
It does ring a bell, yes.
About 250 episodes ago, we did an episode with a guy who was researching the Ingersoll Lockbugs and cross-referencing with Bible codes. What was the term? What was the term? Like not interstitial, but it was letter counting, using a software program to letter count the King James Bible and the Lockwood.
I mean, that's a good memory recall from 250 episodes ago. No, but I can't quite remember. I remember the name. I remember, as you're talking about him.
Little Baron Trump was the book, but everyone sleeps. Hardly anyone knows about this Ingersoll Lockwood guy. But yeah, he's contemporaneous now.
You weren't supposed to know about him. I mean, he was a lawyer. No one bought the books.
No.
And they didn't become popular until Trump was in office for the first time. And that does raise the question, are they as old as we've been told, or are they part of a marketing strategy to support Trump's term in office? Is that possible? But, it is odd. But The Last President is an interesting book. But, of course, The Adventures of Baron Trump are about a lad called Baron, whose mentor is Don. They live in Castle Trump and go to Agartha. It's a little bit weird, but some people believe that people like Trump, these very, very powerful families, and obviously if you look at his mother's side, they ultimately are Rothschilds, that they are following a script that was written a very long time ago, and they're playing it out. They're following they're following it word for word. Everything that's happening right now was planned a very long time ago. He is exactly where he's supposed to be. And obviously what's just happened in Venezuela, that's all part of it. That at some point they are going to take over, and we are going to have one world order where there is one person ruling over everything, and it is looking like it's going to be him. And then it's all going to come tumbling down, apparently, and that's where Tony Blair fits into it all.
Oh gosh, Oh my gosh.
Maybe that should be episode 2.
Yeah. Teasing us with Tony Blair.
You could do a whole episode on Tony Blair, that's for sure.
Tony B.
People really knew who he was.
Yeah. Well, Guy, this has been fascinating. I've really enjoyed you.
Yes.
I enjoyed your book and speaking to you.
Thank you.
The chat has enjoyed the chat as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I can't see, it's too small.
Ah, well.
No, there's been lots of positive comments. Yeah.
Normally, the only negative ones I get are from people that that have listened to my thoughts on the Bible and whether or not religion's been hijacked and weaponized. And a lot of people say, no, it's all God's word. And I just think, well, it's been translated badly. Half of it's missing. And a king came along who had a 12-year-old wife and 2 gay lovers and rewrote the whole thing to make him look like God had put him in power. So, I just that's the only backlash I tend to get. Most people are quite open to looking at the falsification of our history and thinking new things, but those that have been really brought up in a religious household tend to find some of my work a little bit hard to accept, and I can totally understand why. I've got a Jewish mother, a Roman Catholic father, and a Muslim wife, so I'm surrounded by people who don't necessarily agree with me all the time.
Yeah.
No way. Right, well, Guy, the Tartarian Empire.co.uk, is that the best place for people to go?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And then they can, they can message me if they want. They can read some of my work. But there's links on there to YouTube and Facebook.
Super.
I haven't got the CIA document on there, but what I'll do is I'll email you a link to that, so you've got it.
Yeah, that'd be ace. Yeah. What have you got in the pipeline? You got anything coming up early this year?
I'm absolutely gutted because I booked a couple of weeks ago to go to Paris in February to visit the catacombs. And when I booked the flights, I didn't think to check first. Booked the flights, booked the hotel, booked the Louvre, and a couple of other places I want to see. And went to book the catacombs, and they're closed at the moment, being refurbished.
Oh.
But a friend of mine's told me how I can get in another way.
Oh,
So I got that, and then I'm doing a convention in Ireland, and then I'm hopefully doing a series of talks in America in October and November, and then Japan.
Wow.
My book's been published in Japanese, so quite a bit going on. But I'm not writing anything right now. I'm just trying to slow down a little bit, but. The biggest hurdle I've got coming up this year is whether or not I'll be allowed into America. So we'll just have to wait and see, just because of my views and what I put out there.
Well, if you need anyone to carry your bags to Japan, Guy, just give me a call.
I was going to say my wife's nabbed that, but I'll be carrying hers.
Well, this has been great. Thanks for your time, Guy. Really appreciate it. Find time to come and talk to us, and best of luck with what you've got coming up this year. It sounds really exciting.
Thank you. And I really appreciate you having me on. And if you want me to come back on and talk about anything else, ready when you are.
Yeah, of course.
Super, excellent.
Yeah.
Right, guys. Right, so we're going to let Guy go and get on with the rest of his Sunday. And we'll be back in about 10 minutes, us 3, and do a bit of news.
Yes.
All right. Okay, thanks again, Guy. It's been
Thanks
a pleasure.
again.
Have a good Sunday, what's left of it.
Thank you.
And,
thanks very much.
Cheers, Guy. See you in a bit.
Bye-bye. Bye.
See you soon, folks. Bye.